afternoon, and welcome to the ERCC, the Emergency Response Coordination Center. This is the beating heart of our European Union Civil Protection Mechanism. This mechanism has been established more than 2 decades ago in order to provide for a joined-up, common European response to all sorts of natural or man-made disasters and other crises. And these days, unsurprisingly, our colleagues here are mainly, but not exclusively, mainly dealing with the latest man-made disaster, the Russian aggression against Ukraine. This aggression has caused a humanitarian disaster of proportions that we have not seen since World War II. The needs of people in Ukraine are enormous. They are growing every day, every another day that this aggression continues. But also, the solidarity of the European Union, its member states, and other participating states in the civil protection mechanism has been unprecedented and extraordinary. Today, all 27 EU member states and 2 other participating states in the Union Civil Protection Mechanism are contributing the emergency aid channeled to Ukraine through the Union Civil Protection Mechanism. There are supplies being offered to ERCC, registered in the information system of ERCC, and then coordinated and delivered to Ukraine. This is about food, medicines, medical equipment, ambulances, mobile hospitals, firefighting equipment, firefighting trucks, fuel, and the like, all intended to alleviate the suffering of Ukrainian people, of civilian population of Ukraine. We are also helping others, especially the neighboring countries, Moldova in particular, because of its limited capacities, limited resources, and it is, as you know, under severe pressure of the influx of refugees from Ukraine. But also EU member states can ask for assistance, and they did ask for assistance, like Poland, like Slovakia, or Czech Republic. And to all these requests, we are mobilizing response from EU member states and other participating states. And as I said, this response has been extraordinary. There is another part to this house. This house is Directorate General ECHO. ECHO stands for European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations. This other part of the house is about humanitarian aid. And we have mobilized, from the beginning of this aggression, the humanitarian aid. We have more than tripled our previous allocation because we have been in Ukraine with our humanitarian aid since 2014, when the conflict started in the Donbas region. We have more than tripled this humanitarian aid this year, and all of this aid, more than 90 million euro as the initial allocation, has been already committed, has been already allocated to our humanitarian partners who are there on the ground, working to help people in need, to alleviate their suffering. Now they have one big challenge, our humanitarian partners. And this big challenge is insecurity and disregard for international humanitarian law. The Russian forces, in violation of international humanitarian law, are not protecting civilians, are destroying and damaging civilian infrastructure, and are not providing for unimpeded access for humanitarian supplies and humanitarian workers to people in need. This access has been, in many places, sporadic at best, or non-existent. That's why we continue to call on the Russian Federation, on its forces, to respect the international humanitarian law, to protect civilians, to refrain from damaging and destroying civilian infrastructure, and to respect the international humanitarian law. Here with me, as Balázs said, are also director of the ERCC, and the head of unit of humanitarian aid for neighborhood, Martin Taschner, and director Hans Das, where is Hans? There, who are also able to give you more details, but I'm now ready for your questions.
We start with questions for the Commissioner. No rush, we have the time, so please, any questions? You have one, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the patterns that you're seeing. So are these refugees who are fleeing Ukraine, are they staying in one particular country? Are they choosing to go into more other countries more than certain countries? And also, how are you sharing this information with the countries in real time? So for example, are you telling the United States, for example, how many refugees are trying to go there?
First of all, what we are seeing, what we are witnessing is extraordinary and unprecedented. We have 1 million refugees per week entering the European Union. 1 million per week. These figures are just unbelievable, and of course this represents a big challenge for all the countries, especially those that are neighboring Ukraine. Now, as you know, the large number, more than half of all refugees have entered Poland for various reasons, geographic vicinity, but also the large community that has been in Poland, large community of Ukrainians already. But they are also moving elsewhere. As you know, European Union has activated the Temporary Protection Directive, which allows refugees from Ukraine to ask for the status for temporary protection anywhere in the European Union, which gives them access to health, access to education, access to labor market, and gives them legal status for 1 year at least. So they are free to choose, and we see movements across Europe by the refugees, so we expect that they will spread across the European Union. But we will also have to find ways to assist those member states that are most under pressure, like Poland and some others. And for that purpose, my colleague Commissioner Johansson is working on solidarity platform, which would help distribute this responsibility for taking care of the refugees.
Hi, Danny from...
Can you wait until I give you the floor? But go ahead, please.
Danny from the Spanish news agency EFE. In terms of proportion, I would like to know how much of the aid is going to Ukraine and how much to other member states. And given also the fact that Russian forces, as you mentioned, are not respecting humanitarian international law. And which are your expectations, your estimation of how many refugees could arrive to Europe? Last week, some EU officials said 15 million refugees. Are you still working with that figure?
On the number of refugees, we of course cannot predict. Depends on what will be the developments in Ukraine. It depends on how long this aggression continues. It should stop now. That's also something that the International Court of Justice has called the Russian Federation to do, to stop aggression now. And we have been doing the same. We have been calling for stopping this aggression since day one. But as long as this aggression continues, of course, the number of refugees will continue to grow. I mentioned we now have 1 million refugees per week. So if this goes on 10 more weeks, yes, we could reach the figure of 15 million people. Now, the proportion of assistance. Civil protection assistance is in-kind assistance. It is not an accurate job to define its value, but our estimate is that so far the EU member states have contributed more than 100 million euro worth of civil protection items to Ukraine, and also considerable amount to other neighboring countries. As far as humanitarian aid is concerned, we now have allocated 93 million euro. 8 of this 8 million euro is for Moldova and 85 million euro for Ukraine.
Thank you. Already?
I wanted to to go back to what you mentioned earlier, which is there's a problem with having the humanitarian aid getting to the cities that are besieged, that Russia is not giving access. What can then the EU do concretely, more than just calling on Russia, to actually give access to those people and to this aid? Thank you.
Respect for international humanitarian law is the obligation, international legal obligation of all warring parties anywhere there is a conflict. We know who the warring parties are. We also know that there are mediation attempts between the two warring parties to agree on providing for safe passage. This mediation is being done by International Committee of the Red Cross. It is also done by the United Nations. But what we see is that these agreements on safe passage are not always respected. Actually, most often they are not, and this is something that worries us, and this is something that is clearly the primary responsibility of the Russian forces, of the invading forces.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Here you only manage the humanitarian aid, or also the aid for the material, the lethal material that is sending to Ukraine?
Here in the ERCC,
Yes.
our colleagues manage in-kind assistance under the civil protection. As I said, this is food, medicines, shelter items, ambulances, medical equipment, and so on. The other part of our house deals with humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid does not go to the governments. Humanitarian aid goes to people in need through our humanitarian partners. Our humanitarian partners are numerous. We have more than 200 of them, and they include United Nations agencies, they include the Red Cross and Red Crescent family, and they include international NGOs.
Any other questions? Please go ahead.
Is it possible to bring all this material to cities like Mariupol or Kharkiv? Is it possible to bring this aid where it's most needed?
When it comes to the in-kind assistance that we provide through the civil protection mechanism, our responsibility is to bring it to Ukrainian side of the border, either to the border crossing point where it is then handed over to Ukrainians or to Ukrainian authorities, or to some hub on the Ukrainian territory. This is how it is being done. It is a challenging exercise because of the volume of assistance involved. That's why we established logistical hubs, one in Poland and another one in Romania, to facilitate this delivery and its handover to the Ukrainian side. As far as humanitarian aid is concerned, this is delivered by humanitarian partners who are working on the ground, and it is about this the challenge that they are facing that I was talking before. They do have difficulties reaching some of the besieged cities. They do have difficulties reaching the population which is trapped in the zones of active conflict, and this is primarily because the Russian forces are not living up to their international legal obligation, which is to provide safe passage for civilians who are seeking safety, and the safe passage also for humanitarian workers and the supplies that are intended to people in need.
Thank you. Birgit, you have a question?
Is there any shift from other humanitarian crises are not stopping because there's a war in Ukraine, so is there any shift, or is it a completely other budget, let's say?
We never take from one humanitarian crisis to give to another, because we treat all humanitarian needs on equal basis. When we need to top up our allocation, in this case for Ukraine, because before the conflict was limited to the east, to the Donbas region, but now the entire country is under attack. Of course, we look for additional funding, which means that in this particular case, we topped up our humanitarian aid from our own operational reserves. We also received a transfer from some other parts of the European Commission's budget. So this is how we go about it.
Follow-up question?
I have a follow-up. How much does the humanitarian assistance flowing into Ukraine rely on help from Ukrainian government officials and Ukrainian forces? And if the government collapses, if Kyiv, for example, is taken, how will that affect humanitarian assistance going into the country, if at all?
Humanitarian assistance is provided in accordance with basic humanitarian principles: humanity, independence, impartiality, and neutrality. No matter who controls a territory where people are who need humanitarian assistance, they should be able to get it. And that's why humanitarian partners of ours operate in accordance with these principles. They are neutral, they are independent from any authority, they do not take sides. Their only mission is to provide assistance to people who need it.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Is this the biggest crisis you are managing from the center?
This is the largest ever civil protection operation since the establishment of the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, by far the largest.
Go ahead, please.
If the war doesn't stop in the next few weeks, are you not afraid that one day you will not have enough funds or material to handle all the new refugees that will come to Europe?
The European Union is committed to support Ukraine and European Union member states as long as possible, as long as necessary, with everything possible.
Question? No? Any other questions? No more questions? Last chance? Well, in that case, thank you very much for your participation. Thank you, Commissioner, for briefing us on the latest. We'll let the Commissioner go and we'll continue with our experts.